Have you ever been in a season so dark that you stopped believing anyone was there? Not just people, God. Have you ever prayed into what felt like an empty ceiling and wondered if the words were going anywhere at all? Have you ever done everything right, lived faithfully, trusted deeply, gave generously, and still found yourself standing in the middle of a storm you did not deserve and could not explain? If you have, what you felt in that moment was real. But what you concluded from it may not have been. There was a man named Joseph. Not the Joseph from the ancient scriptures, though their stories carry the same fingerprint. This Joseph was 35 years old. A devoted man, a faithful man, the kind of person who showed up for everyone around him consistently and quietly without expecting anything in return. He had a good marriage, a son he loved deeply named Nathan, a career he had built with integrity over 12 years, and then, in the space of 18 months, everything he had built was dismantled. His company collapsed in a scandal he did not cause but could not escape. His reputation, the thing he had protected most carefully, was damaged by association. And in the middle of trying to hold everything together, his marriage buckled under the weight of the financial and emotional pressure until it broke entirely. Joseph found himself at 36 years old sitting in a small rented room with nothing but a bed, a Bible, and a photograph of his son Nathan on the nightstand. And he said something to God that night that he had never said before. He said, "Where are you? Because I cannot feel you anywhere." The room stayed silent, and Joseph, for the first time in his life, felt completely alone. Here is something that needs to be said honestly and without religious pretense. The feeling of abandonment is real. It is not weakness. It is not faithlessness. It is not evidence of a shallow relationship with God. It is the honest human response to seasons of darkness that arrive without explanation and stay without apology. Every person of deep faith, every single one across the entirety of human history, has had a Joseph moment. A moment where the silence felt like absence, where the darkness felt like rejection, where the distance felt permanent. Even the greatest figures of faith cried out in the darkness. Even they asked where God had gone. Even they sat in rooms that felt empty and wondered if their prayers were reaching anything at all. The feeling of abandonment does not mean God has left. It means you are human, and you are in a hard season. And hard seasons have a way of making the presence of God feel very far away even when he has never been closer. Joseph spent 3 months in that small rented room. In those 3 months he learned to distinguish between two things that can feel identical but are completely different. The silence of absence, and the silence of presence. Absence is empty. It has no weight. It offers nothing and asks nothing and leaves the room feeling hollow in a way that grows colder the longer you sit in it. Presence, even silent presence, has weight. It has texture. It is the kind of silence that feels inhabited. That feels like someone sitting with you in the dark without speaking because speaking is not what the moment requires. Joseph began to notice, slowly, reluctantly, honestly, that the silence in his room was the second kind. Not empty, heavy, not cold, quiet. He began to notice small things he had been too consumed by grief to see before. The neighbor who knocked on his door with food and stayed for 2 hours without being asked. The unexpected message from an old colleague offering a small piece of work at exactly the moment the money ran out. The morning he woke from the first genuinely peaceful sleep he had experienced in months. For no reason he could explain, with a stillness in his chest that had not been there the night before. None of these things announced themselves as God. But Joseph, who had known God long enough to recognize his handwriting, saw it. Not abandonment. Provision, quiet. Underneath, consistent. The question Joseph eventually stopped being afraid to ask was not "Where are you?" It was, "Why?" Why the darkness? Why the loss? Why the dismantling of everything he had built so carefully and faithfully? And the answer that arrived, not in a vision, not in a voice, but in the slow patient accumulation of understanding that only time and stillness can bring, was this. The man Joseph was before the collapse could not have carried what Joseph was being prepared to carry after it. The version of him that existed at 35, successful, comfortable, quietly proud of what he had built, had mistaken the gifts for the giver. Had begun, without realizing it, to trust the career more than the one who provided it. The marriage more than the one who ordained it. The reputation more than the one who established it. The darkness did not come to destroy Joseph. It came to free him, to strip away everything he had placed his identity in so that what remained, the irreducible core of who he was, could be seen clearly. By him. And by God. What remained when everything was removed was remarkable. Integrity. Compassion. Faith that no longer needed the circumstances to be comfortable in order to survive. That is what the darkness built. And it could not have been built any other way. 2 years after that night in the small rented room, Joseph sat in a different place entirely. Not wealthy, not returned to what he had before, but rooted in a way he had never been when he had everything. He had rebuilt, slowly, quietly, with a different foundation than before. Not reputation. Not titles. Not the approval of people who only stayed when things were comfortable. He had his son Nathan every weekend. And the relationship between them, forged in the honest hours of Joseph's rebuilding, was deeper than anything they had shared when life was easy. He had work that was smaller than before but more aligned with who he actually was. And he had a faith that had been tested in the deepest possible way and had not broken. One evening Nathan asked him, sitting across from Joseph at a kitchen table doing homework, "Dad, were you ever scared that things wouldn't get better?" Joseph looked at his son for a long moment, and he said, "Yes, every single day for a long time. But looking back, I can see that I was never actually alone. I just couldn't see it from inside the storm." Nathan nodded slowly. The way children do when they understand something without having words for it yet. And Joseph understood in that moment that the storm had given him something he could now give his son. Not comfort. Not safety from hard seasons, but evidence. Living, breathing evidence that you can go through the darkest possible version of your life and come out the other side with more than you went in with. That is what God never abandoning you actually looks like. Not the absence of storms, but presence inside every single one of them. I want to speak to you directly right now. If you are in a season where God feels absent, I am not going to tell you to just believe harder. I am not going to hand you a scripture and send you on your way. I am going to tell you what Joseph learned in that small rented room. The silence is not emptiness. The darkness is not abandonment. The stripping away of what you built is not punishment. It is often the most profound act of love available to someone who has placed their identity in the wrong things. God does not abandon his people in the storm. He enters the storm with them.